Sorry about that.
Your abs.
Actually, stick this on. I forgot to do this part. Which one of these are you going to be using first? There's the one at 1774 to 1898.
We'll start chronologically through 1774.
Okay. I forgot I should probably get this up and going for you.
And I'm driving, should be down there, right?
It should be. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. All right. Now. Hello everybody, and welcome to the final genealogy Facebook live stream we will be doing for this year. My name is Daniel Ware, and I'm the genealogy librarian here at the Kentucky Historical Society. I do apologize for the little technical hiccup at the beginning. Today is going to be a special guest speaker, Walter Bowman, who is with Kentucky Military Affairs, and he will be talking about Kentucky military records from 1774 and onwards, and so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to him, I believe. So,
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Walter Bowman. I'm the Archivist for the Kentucky Department for Military Affairs, the Military Records and Research Branch. We hold a collection of state's military records back over the course of 230 years. And that collection varies in scope and capacity, and we'll kind of go through what records are in that collection, the variations on the existence of it. The first thing I want to touch on is some records that are not in our office, but records that are relate to Kentucky military service beginning in 1774, Lord Dunmore's War. Actually, I'll go back a little bit before that. The first Kentucky land grants held at the Kentucky Secretary of State's Land Office from 1772 to 1779 covers service in the French and Indian War, which of course is from 1754 to 1763. Many future Kentuckians will see service in the French and Indian War. Daniel Boone, future Governor Charles Scott are both at Braddock's defeat, along with James Harrod. Harrod actually was Forbes' expedition. So the land records, the Kentucky Secretary of State's Land Office holds a collection of land records granted for service in the French and Indian War. Those will sometimes show individuals' units that they were in during the course of that war. Coming forward, the same is true of service for the Lord Dunmore's War. Land grants were done for the service in that, and you'll oftentimes see individual units named on those land grants. The next scenario we'll look at is, once the Revolutionary War comes into existence, all Kentucky military records for individuals serving either as Kentuckians or who will be future Kentuckians after that war. Those records can be found in a number of places in the state of Virginia, muster roll listings, and also in pensions. There is an app that we use for looking at pension records. It's a Rev War app. I've got it listed here in the records. You can see it is going to be just a Rev War app, and that also is on the NARA, National Archives and Records Administration website. So that's a good source for Revolutionary War records. Again, Kentucky does not hold any records, hard copy records, of either service in conflict either in the French and Indian War or in the American Revolution. The War for the Old Northwest, 1789 to 1795, is the first year first conflict in which Kentucky actually has some military records. There are muster roll listings for individuals who served in the Anthony Wayne and future Governor Charles R. Scott and the War for the Old Northwest. Those records can be found on Ancestry and compiled service records. Also, during that time period, all individuals were basically in the militia, and they will show up on tax lists with the individual regiments named on those tax lists. You can also see, if you have the good fortune for your ancestor to be an officer in the militia, there's the Cornstalk Militia book that's been published, it's also online, which lists militia officers starting in 1792 and going up to the start of the War of 1812. So that is the first records group we're going to look at. Those are ones that we really don't have a lot of in the Military Records Office. The next records group we're going to look at is for the period of 1812 to 1860. And here you see an image of the charge of the Kentucky militia at the Battle of the River Thames, the Battle of the River Thames in Canada in October of 1813. And these records are housed with us in terms of muster roll records. Also at this point, we begin to see governor's correspondence. There was a little governor's correspondence for the 1790s relating to the War for the Old Northwest, not that much. As a matter of fact, the State Archives holds Governor Shelby's papers for his first term, and that collection is really held in one box. So by the time we get to the War of 1812, you'll see a little more exhaustive governor's correspondence in terms of appointments and correspondence with units. There's also compiled service records on the Fold 3 and Ancestry, and we're still in that tax list scenario where county tax lists will speak to individuals being in a county, regiment, or battalion. Also during this time period, the state will compile some muster roll listings for all the 1213 Kentucky infantry and mounted infantry formations that go to Canada, and New Orleans also for the U.S. troops raised in Kentucky. Those are in the Adjutant General's report. Those are published or can be found on Ancestry. They also are in hard copy in most public libraries in the state. With my key here. So we're going to go ahead. The same is true of the Spanish-American War, the Mexican War, the compiled service record, the Adjutant General report rather is done for that, as well as you will see starting in the 1830s, various militia companies will have their own records held as part of our collection. So if you're looking for a county militia company that probably was functioning sometime 1830 forward, the military records collection may have those records. They're not comprehensive, but we do have some records for militia formations formed after 1830. Coming forward to the 1860s, the American Civil War, obviously there's a wealth of records for that. The three big groups, one being the Adjutant General's report, which again, they're listing by regimental muster of soldiers. There's a series of 4 volumes, 2 for the Confederacy and 2 for the Union. These list by regiment individuals in those formations. They give entry date and exit date and note about their service. There's also compiled service records. Those are largely, or on their entirety, on Fold 3. Most institutions in the state may have a microfilm copy of those compiled service records, and they're simply the service cards created from the actual records themselves in the early 20th century, and those are on microfilm, or again, they're scanned images on the Fold 3 website for access there. There's pension records. Pension records oftentimes are a little more descriptive and advantageous than are the actual military records themselves, because the individual is writing down information himself about the events and not the official information as is included in the compiled service records. So, and this is true, the Confederate compiled service records exist at the State Archives in the original, and they also have been scanned by KDLA on the State Archives website. Those are about 6,000 of those. Kentucky waited till 1912 to pay its Confederate pension, so there were only about 6,000 Confederate veterans left to apply for that pension. The Union pensions are paid earlier than that, and those can be, the indexes to them can be found on Ancestry, and of course the actual pensions themselves are held in the National Archives and Records Administration. What we're going to look at this, in terms of I mentioned the information sometimes is more exhaustive on the application than it is on the compiled service records. I've chosen an individual, a Confederate pension application for John Wesley Frazier. John Wesley Frazier rode in the Confederate Cavalry Battalion during the war, and his command surrendered at Mount Sterling in May of 1865. Push the right button here. This is a copy of the pension application. It's kind of hard to read. I hope when you get this you can kind of make it larger. As you read through this, in the second paragraph, he will actually discuss what all he had or was forced to surrender at Mount Sterling in May of 1865. You can see he was very proud of the fact he was riding a horse that was 16 hands high. He had a pair of Navy Colts, and he also had a two-banded Lee Enfield rifle, rather, a saddle and so on. So these things we would not have known from his compiled service records, but looking at his pension application, we know a lot about at least what he was carrying at the end of the war. And sometimes you'll get a little bit meta narrative. Sometimes they'll discuss their lives before the war, and sometimes they'll discuss events, in the course of the war, which are valuable to you as a researcher that you might not otherwise have known had you not looked at the pension application as a record. Again, these are available both at the State Archives as originals, and they're also on the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives website, scanned in. So this is an enlistment for the Kentucky State Guard. Once the Civil War ends, the militia system changes over. There's some caveats to that, but the militia system changes over to a state guard system, a regimental state guard system. Only about 3,000 or 4,000 individuals, probably in many cases fewer than that, depending on the years that this is being done, are in the Kentucky State Guard. But if you're fortunate enough to have an ancestor who was a member of the Kentucky State Guard in the years following the Civil War and forward, there should be some kind of enlistment document, some kind of records. Generally, after the 1890s, we will have actual enlistment documents for these individuals, but it varies a little bit in the years prior to that. In that, so you will see, sometimes they're very instructive. You will see, obviously, his age. Sometimes you'll see a description of him, and so on and so forth. They're just things that will be of value to you as a researcher, and those are only, again, for the 3,000 or 4,000 individuals who actually serve in the Kentucky State Guard. Those are records that we hold in military records on microfilm, and I don't know that collection exists anywhere besides with us. Okay, as we said, so State Guard service records starting in 1866, generally muster rolls up to about the early 1890s. Once you get to about 1892 or 1893, and there's a greater interest in the Guard having records, then you will begin to see actual enlistment records and sometimes discharge records for individuals who are members of the Kentucky State Guard. So if that's the case, then you will be able to contact military records, and we should be able to find some kind of record for your ancestor as a member of the Kentucky State Guard. Now, we're going to come to 1898 here in a second and talk about that for just a minute, because Kentucky will deploy its State Guard for the Spanish-American War. We do have those records for those individual soldiers, but there's another record group we're going to talk about in the second segment of this that's going to be a little more comprehensive and speak more to the War of 1812, or rather the Spanish-American War, and also that's going to cover more of just northern just the State Guards. Actually want to cover Kentuckians serving in the Spanish-American War across the board, even going forward from that into the so-called Philippine insurrection in the early 1900s, and up until the time that conflict actually ends about 1901 or 1902. So that is for the first segment of this from 1774 to 1898. I'm going to stop there. We'll take questions if there are any, and then we'll do the second segment for 1898 through the mid-20th century.
Let's see anything yet, so give it just a moment. See if anybody.
And I just don't do these things well without an audience. I mean, it's hard to read the room. It's impossible to know. So, I just kind of rush through it, and it's not very good at all. I'm sorry.
Fine, no, you're.
I know. I appreciate that, but I still, I'm not real fond. If we ever do anything like this again, I do hope we can dredge up an audience somewhere. Some unsuspecting researchers or something. I don't know when I'm ready. This will go a little better when we do an actual record. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Walter Bowman. I'm the Archivist for the Kentucky Department of Military Affairs, Military Records and Research Branch. And we're doing the second segment of Kentucky Military Records 1774 through 1958. The reason for the date on this range is because we're dealing with two different types of records, and so we'll come to that in a minute. One's going to be the federal records received to the state. The other is going to be a veterans bonus paid back in Kentucky between 1958 and 1962. And the third is going to be records of the Kentucky National Guard or State Guard, and later on National Guard. So the previous conversation, a lot of the records we dealt with in that presentation were not housed by the Kentucky Department of Military Affairs. There were records groups that were outside the context of that, with the exception of some Adjutant General's report and some Civil War records for militia formations and State Guard formations after the war. So if you have questions about that, you'll have my contact information after the presentation. Please feel free to ask you those questions, and I'll try to give you directly what resources there are for those records. So we're looking here at the picture of a M3 Stuart fighting in Bataan in the spring of 1942, late winter 1942. The one company of the Kentucky Army National Guard from Harrodsburg actually became part of a tank battalion that fought on the Bataan Peninsula in 1942 and was subsequently captured there when Bataan and Cricketore fell. So the record troop, as I mentioned in the overview, are going to be, there's a Kentucky Veterans Bonus. Kentucky paid a one-time veterans bonus of up to $500 for veterans who had served in the Spanish-American War during active conflict up through the Korean War rather, and shortly after that. This bonus was paid from 1958 to 1962, and it varied by what type of service you had as to how much you received for that. Prior to 1947, and the advent of the Department of Defense coming into existence, one copy of military discharge, after that point rather, one copy of a military discharge comes back to the state upon the record, or the state you enlisted from. So, but prior to 1947, there is no scenario in which a military discharge is returned to the state from the federal government. There are, in World War I, there was an agency known as the Council of Defense. These folks tracked the state service and the various county service during that war. These Council of Defense created county veterans books, or county books and service cards listing individuals, the service of individuals from that county. The books also tracked private entities like the Red Cross or fundraising drives, war bonds, things like that are show up. Every county should have had a Council of Defense book. Some of those are online. Many counties have them still in their probably the local public library. There is a state level microfilm collection that exists at libraries and archives, and also at military affairs. Starting in 1942, veterans were asked to file a copy of their discharge in a county veterans book in their home county. So if you check with the Office of the County Clerk in the counties, those individual records were filed, they chose to do so, were filed in county veterans books. Those are governed by the county clerk, so the access to them may be limited depending on the scenario the county clerk has. So those are the four of the records groups we're going to look at here. And so going on to the next one. This is a World War I Council of Defense service card. This is for, as you can see there, Mr. Aldridge. Aldridge was a member of the Kentucky Army National Guard. And initially, you can see, at this point, still a state guard. You can see E Company, 3rd Infantry, Kentucky National Guard. He goes on to serve in France with an engineering formation. And the Council of Defense card is pretty enlightening in terms of we see where he served, what actual actions he was in, and the fact he was slightly wounded. So this Council of Defense card is created after the war from information that was the Council of Defense was able to gather, and this is a whole series of these cards just for service in World War I. I can also be found in the County Council of Defense books. So he will go on after the war to continue serving in the National Guard. This is his record from the National Guard. So we actually have an enlistment document giving his age, and these vary a little bit. Again, they may describe the individual, but if he's one of those few thousand folks that served in the Kentucky Army National Guard after World War I, then we're going to have, or before World War I, in some instances, we're going to have some kind of an enlistment and discharge record for him. But again, this is a very small collection of individuals, again, only a few thousand. So this is the county veterans book. It doesn't look any different than the other record, except this is something you would have found in the book. And sometimes the discharge itself was not introduced verbatim. You'll see there, this is a certificate in lieu or lost or destroyed discharge certificate. So sometimes the county clerk would simply go in and write down on this blank form that you see there the information off the individual's discharge. The individual kept the discharge, but the record stayed in the county veterans book. But again, the frustration here is if the individual did not apply to take his discharge down and place it in the county veterans book himself, it would not appear there. Okay, so this is an example of the veterans bonus. Again, between 1958 and 1962, Kentucky paid a one-time veterans bonus for service from the Spanish-American War through the Korean War. And so this is the application. You can see this gentleman, Charles Kensler, actually applied for the bonus. In the lower right, you'll see he applied for the bonus in April of 1961. He received $423 for his service. He had lived in Kentucky. You can see he was asking how long he lived in Kentucky before he enlisted, and then where he's currently living. And so all this information there. If you're accessing the bonus for genealogy research, you can see that's going to be kind of beneficial to you. You'll learn things you may not have known about him from his application. You'll also at one point in the application get to see his signature if you have not seen it before. The record that he submitted, and the value of the bonus in terms of military records is that the individual must submit a copy of his discharge. World War II era, every branch has its own discharge. The Army discharge is a 53-55, WD, War Department, AGO, Adjutant General's Office, 53-55. The Navy has a NAV per 153. So there are different discharges for different branches up until 1947 when the Department of Defense comes into existence. So this document we're looking at here is for the Army. He is in the Army for a WD, War Department AGO 53-55. And it very much like the World War I document, although it's not going to get quite down to the sector as the World War I document does. It certainly lets us know that we know what formation he was in. He was in Sea Battery 118th Field Artillery Battalion. We know that he served in Normandy, northern France, the Ardennes, Rhineland, and Central Europe. We can see the decorations he received. We also know a little bit more about him, his description of him, and also most of these will have some kind of listing of civilian occupation, and we will know a little bit more about him, what he was doing when he entered the service. So, and this is true, some versions, now this is not going to be a document that exists for the period, obviously, of World War I or Spanish-American War, but there will be some kind of enlistment or discharge document for any applicant who applies for this veterans bonus. Yeah. Real quick aside here, you may not know it or not, most of us between the ages of 18 and 64 are still in the militia. Kentucky has an active militia, which is dormant until a need for it arises. So in World War II, the entire Kentucky Army National Guard had been called away overseas, either in the Pacific or in Europe, and Kentucky basically had no troops in the event for some reason some foreign power managed to land, somewhere and come up the Mississippi and land in western Kentucky, what have you. So the Kentucky Active Militia was put back into existence. It was a 4-regimental system, and so individuals, again, males 18 to 64, were required to be able to serve in the Kentucky Active Militia and this formation was called out during World War II. It kind of acted as state police in some instances, but by and large, it at least was in the field training in the event it was needed to be called up. This is an enlistment record, and these records are held on microfilm by Military Affairs, and this is the enlistment record here you see for a member of the Kentucky Active Militia in 1945. Okay, so in 1947, the world changes. We get a comprehensive discharge for all branches of service. It's known as the DD-214, Department Form 214, and this is a blank one of those, and that is something that you will see going forward for the next 80 years. Anyone separating out of the service after that date in 1947, that 214 is going to be the record they receive. Now, the reason the cutoff here, there's two reasons the cutoff is what it is the bonus was stopped being paid in 1962, and Military Affairs, the record collection up until 1950 after 1950 the record collection is closed. You have to be the veteran themselves or the next of kin to request records from Military Affairs. If it's pre-1950, you can make a request to us, and we'll be able to help you certainly with the World War II records if they apply for the bonus, and some Korean War records. But the document you're going to receive if you're contacting the National Personnel Records Center, or if you're the veteran or next of kin from us, is going to be this 214, and you can kind of look at that after the fact here and see what information you're going to learn from that, getting a copy of the 214. Obviously reports of casualty. Now, casualty reports generally only show up on muster rolls, or you will see service cards for casualties in the World War I collection. But for World War II, again, there are only World War II records of individuals who applied for that bonus. And families who had casualties in World War II oftentimes only got a notification of death or a letter of condolence. So we did not get a report of casualty as such, a list of circumstances of the casualty, units and things of that nature. We just got that notification of death, and that truly is not a lot of value for doing genealogy and researching the individual. So starting in 1952, or 1950 actually, the military puts out a DA form, Department of Army form, saying 52 report of death. And let me go back one here. This is actually a bonus application for a World War II casualty, a Korean War casualty, and you can see there that it's got the fact he was killed in service and the signature of the family member. There is a very good, I did not include a link for this, but I can certainly advise you where it is, or you can find it yourself online, called the Korean War Project. It will give you the information off of the DA Form 52, report of casualty for individuals killed in the Korean War. And it also has some other aspects of it that are valuable. But truly, if you're looking for a report of casualty for the Korean War, the website is the Korean War Project, and it will give you, the things I've talked about that you would have seen on a report of casualty, the unit, the circumstances of the casualty, and things of that nature. So, in the modern era, we have the DD 1300. Any casualty that occurs probably after 1960 is going to be one of these. So if you're looking for a Vietnam casualty, a lot of the information from Vietnam casualties are on another website entitled The Wall, just The Wall, one word, and that will bring you to the information from the DD 1300 rather, for casualties in Vietnam, and so on from there. So again, the records we hold at Military Affairs at this point are those returned to the State of Home Record, again 1947. One copy of the Department of 214 comes back to the State of Home Record. That is the Military Affairs collection, but again, post-1950 requires the veteran or next of kin to request that. That is true of casualty reports, things that are going forward. Also, the records of the Kentucky Army National Guard are held by us, same scenario though. Any post-1950 record must require the veteran himself or the next of kin if he is deceased. Records prior to that are, again, open records. And of course, there's always possibility for active federal service. You're looking for more than just a discharge. You can contact the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri, and they are part of the National Archives. So just the NARA will get you to the National Personnel Records Center. Okay, again, online resources, the federal census, I'll talk about that briefly. The 1900, 1910, and 1920 federal census actually has a component to it called naval and military. So if you go into the federal census, and it's better to browse this than to search it, But go into your federal census on your drop-down states, and one of the categories is going to be naval and military, and that will list by formation or post or by vessel, depending on what branch of service your ancestors in, the individual on that post or on that vessel. Again, those three census. Also on Ancestry, there's an Army Register for, I think it is 1798 to 1914. Again, pretty browsable. It is kind of searchable. If you know about when your ancestors were in, you might better serve to browse that. But again, that's an Ancestry link, and it's going to be Army Registers 1798 to 1914. Ancestry has Navy ships muster rolls from 1940s to 1970s. So again, it's very, very browsable. If you know what vessel your ancestor served on, or your kinsman served on, you can certainly check that, and that's again on Ancestry. Certain Ancestry and Fold 3, and sometimes local public libraries, it depends. When a basic training cycle is completed, and the individuals graduate from basic training to go on to advanced individual training, a training cycle book is created, so that if you don't have a picture of your ancestor in service, these go back to about World War II. So again, they're on Ancestry sometimes by community. So if you go into the yearbook section of Ancestry and check by community, if there's a training cycle book for a post in that community, you probably see that. Fold 3 has them freestanding. Some posts, if the post is large enough and has a library, may have the training cycle books for that post there. I know Great Lakes Naval Training Center in Chicago has, or in Waukegan rather, has a series of their yearbooks online. And then also you can check with a local public library in the county that has the base there. Very easily somebody has donated a series of these training books to the library along those lines. So that at least back to World War II will give you a chance to see a picture of individual in service if you don't have one for him when he was in. Sorry. Then also we have local newspapers. Starting again about World War II era, or sometimes earlier than that, you will see local newspapers have servicemen's pages. Now they're not guaranteed. They're like sometimes once you figure out in a newspaper where the obituary page is, you're good to go henceforth. That may not be the case with these servicemen's pages. They may have waited till they got a group of servicemen in service and done the page one time a week. It may be more than one time a week, but if you go to your local newspapers, you're looking for a picture of your ancestor in service, again dating back to the 1940s. Theoretically, the local newspaper will have, if somebody bothers to submit it to them, a picture of your ancestor or information about your ancestor when you entered the service and going to basic training. Again, as mentioned here, the National Archives and Records Administration for the World War II enlistments, such as they exist. They had a catastrophic fire in 1974, but you can certainly check with them to see if those records exist. They do exist after that. Then here also you'll see the links for the Korean War Project and the Wall, both of those for casualties, not so much for individual serving, but for casualties for the Korean War and for the Vietnam War. Okay, we're going to finish up with a picture of the Kentucky Army National Guard, 1st Battalion, 623rd Field Artillery, from the central part of the state, which served all service 2 years in Korea, as you can see from the wintry landscape there. Okay, that pretty much is a broad general overview of the records collection at Military Affairs and collateral records collections that may be of value to you in your research. So we'll take the time now, and if there's any questions, go ahead and ask those of me, if you will.
Thank you.
Well, that's not my best work, so.
All right then, since it doesn't seem that there's any questions at this time, I think we're gonna probably wrap this up. I do thank Walter Bowman for being here today and to pass on his knowledge on Kentucky military records and history and all that kind of good stuff. He's definitely a very valuable resource and person to talk to as far as your Kentucky military ancestors and the records that they may be in. I guess what we can do is if you do have any questions for Walter after this point, you can easily just email me and then I can pass along his contact information, and that way then you can get a hold of him. My email is Daniel, DANIEL, ware, WARE, @ky.gov. And if you do have just in general Kentucky genealogy questions, you can always ask me as well. I'm the genealogy librarian here at the Kentucky Historical Society, like I mentioned at the beginning. And this, like I said at the start, this is going to be it for this year. We're going to try to do some more presentations or streams or something next year. So keep a lookout for that, and we will see you next year. Thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye.
How did you do it on here?